This is a sermon from a church that just planted a campus in a city where I used to serve. So I was interested in hearing for the first time a sermon from the church that many of my former church members are now attending. Dr. Baker preached on the prodigal son, encouraging his congregation to imagine themselves as a son, realizing that life without his father's help is not turning out how he hoped. He engaged his congregation, showed social awareness by acknowledging where they were at, mentioning things that were probably on their mind, like the Super Bowl and their new campus launch. Dr. Baker's heart was clearly to make God the hero of the story. As he read through the text, he reframed the parable by calling it not the story of the prodigal son, but the story of the father who ran. He emphasized that life without God was hopeless and that we cannot fix our lives on our own. When he talked about the listener coming to an understanding that their life was not on track, I do wish that he'd referenced God's calling, that this understanding for their need for God was coming from God and not from their own wisdom. When he told the story of people in the congregation who had allowed God to turn their lives around, he stayed very vague on what was wrong in their lives, just a feeling of not being right or feeling chaotic. He spoke about their willingness to be involved in small group and serving, but he didn't reference a specific spiritual surrender to Jesus, although he did briefly reference baptism. The wind seemed to be that they were really involved with their church now and were feeling better. In his salvation prayer, he did encourage them to ask Jesus to forgive them of their sins and to come into their life, but there was no explanation of what that meant before then. In our lectures this week, faith and repentance were named as necessary elements to a call to salvation. While Dr. Baker referenced these elements, he never went in depth on what we should have faith in besides that God is in control. He didn't emphasize the cross or resurrection until a brief mention at the end. Our lecturer also encouraged us to remember that we're preaching to two types of people, those who are living in spiritual brokenness and those who have been redeemed from spiritual brokenness. Dr. Baker seemed to have the heart of an evangelist and only spoke to the spiritually broken in his message.